The wind carried a chill across the plains, rattling the dry grass that grew wild around the small, leaning house at the edge of Dusty Creek. The boards of the porch creaked under the weight of a woman's weary steps. Her hands, rough from years of work, clutched the worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she looked down the long dirt road that wound through the valley. Her name was Martha Collins, a widow, mother of 3 growing boys, and a woman who'd learned the hard way that not every town in the West had a place for kindness or struggle. Behind her, through the cracked door, came the sound of coughing. Her youngest, Eli, still weak from the fever. She glanced back with worry but didn't step inside just yet. She was waiting, hoping. For what? She couldn't say. It had been 3 months since her husband Henry was buried on the hill behind the house. Since then, neighbors had stopped coming by. The churchwomen stopped bringing bread. Even her husband's old friends, men he'd helped through bad harvests, turned their eyes away when they saw her at the market. A widow with 3 boys was, to them, a burden too heavy for sympathy. And now, she was being forced off the land. That morning, the banker had come by again, Mr. Daly, dressed in his black suit and cold smile. He'd nailed the notice right to her door, property foreclosed. Vacate within 7 days. She hadn't even fought him this time. Her strength had been spent on too many hopeless days already. The boys were still inside, packing what little they owned into a wagon that had seen better days. The eldest, Ben, only 17, was trying to be strong. Luke, 13, worked quietly beside him, while little Eli, barely 8, sat by the fire wrapped in a blanket. Martha wiped at her eyes. She couldn't let them see her cry. She turned back toward the road, and that's when she saw the horse. A tall chestnut stallion approached, kicking up dust with each step. The man in the saddle wore a weathered brown coat and a hat pulled low over his face. He rode like someone who knew these lands well, like he had nothing to prove and everything to protect. When he reached the porch, he reined in the horse and tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he greeted, voice steady as a river. "Name's Cal Weston. I'm looking for a place called the Collins Farm." Martha straightened, cautious. "You found it, though it won't be ours much longer." Cal looked at her, studying the sorrow written across her face. "I reckon I'm too late then," she frowned. "Too late for what?" He dismounted, dusting off his coat. "Your husband, Henry Collins. I worked with him 2 years ago on the trail drive down to Abilene. He told me once if I ever came through Dusty Creek, I'd find good folks and a place to rest my horse. Said I'd be welcome." The mention of Henry's name was enough to break what little wall she'd built around her heart. Her voice trembled. "Henry's gone. Fever took him last winter." Cal's eyes softened. "I'm sorry to hear that." He looked around at the small, failing farm, the wagon half-packed with meager belongings. "You fixin' to leave?" "Yes," she said quietly. "The bank's taking the land. We've nowhere to go." The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the unspoken truths of a hard life. Cal glanced at the boys peering from the doorway, their faces drawn but curious. He nodded at them kindly. "Ma'am," he said after a moment, "if you'll allow it, maybe I can help." That evening, Cal helped them finish packing. He didn't ask for thanks or pay. When the wagon was loaded, he tied his horse to the back and followed on foot as Martha drove away from the only home she'd ever known. The sun was setting, a streak of gold and fire across the plains. Martha kept her eyes on the horizon, refusing to look back. "Where will we go, Ma?" Ben asked, reins loose in his hands. "I don't know, son," she admitted. "Maybe we'll find a town that won't turn us away." Cal walked alongside the wagon, silent for a while before speaking. "There's a place about 15 miles west. A small ranch I'm fixing up. Belonged to my uncle before he passed. Land's good, house is standing. I could use help running it." Martha turned her head, surprised. "You're offering us work?" "I'm offering you a home," he said simply. The boys exchanged glances, not sure whether to believe him. But something in Cal Weston's voice, steady, certain, and kind, made Martha's heart ease for the first time in months. They reached his ranch by moonlight. It wasn't grand, but it was solid. A big barn, a windmill creaking in the wind, a warm light shining from the house window. The scent of hay and pine filled the air. Cal led them inside. The fireplace burned bright, casting soft light across clean wooden floors. "It's not much," he said, "but it's honest." To Martha, it was everything. The days that followed were full of work, but also laughter. the kind she hadn't heard since before Henry died. Ben helped Cal mend fences and round up strays. Luke learned to ride and took pride in it. Little Eli spent his mornings feeding the chickens and his afternoons chasing the ranch dog through the yard. And Martha, she found herself cooking for more than hunger. She baked bread again. She hummed while she worked. Each evening they gathered around the table together. Cal would tell stories of the cattle drives, of the nights under open skies, and of men who learned the meaning of trust out there in the wild. And every night, before heading to bed, he would quietly say to Martha, "You and the boys did good today. You belong here. But small towns don't forget their gossip easily." Word spread through Dusty Creek that the widow Collins had moved in with a cowboy stranger. Some said she was chasing comfort. Others whispered about sin and shame. One morning, Martha rode into town for supplies and felt the stares. Whispers followed her through the general store like shadows. As she left, the banker, Mr. Daly, stepped in her path. "Well, well, Mrs. Collins, seems you found yourself a savior." She tightened her grip on the basket in her hands. "We're doing fine, Mr. Daly," he smirked. "You think that cowboy can change what folks think of you?" Once a beggar widow, always a beggar widow. Martha didn't answer. She turned and left, her back straight though her heart was trembling. When she returned home, Cal saw the hurt in her eyes. "What happened?" "Nothing," she said, but he knew better. He stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Martha, this place, these people don't get to decide your worth. You and your boys have worked harder than most men I've known. You've earned everything here." Her eyes filled with tears she couldn't hide. "Cal, I just don't want to be someone's pity." He shook his head. "You're not. Your strength. Your family." A few weeks later, Dusty Creek was hit by a storm, the likes of which no one had seen in years. Winds tore through fences, rivers overflowed, and cattle scattered across miles of land. Cal, Ben, and Luke rode out into the storm, chasing after the herd. Martha watched from the porch, praying every second for their safety. Hours passed before the rain slowed and the men returned, muddy, soaked, but alive, driving the frightened cattle back into the pens. When Cal dismounted, Martha ran to him. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him, trembling. "You're safe," she whispered. He held her close for a moment before pulling back, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're home now," he said softly. All accepted. That night they sat together by the fire. The storm outside had calmed, leaving behind only the smell of rain and fresh earth. The boys slept soundly in their rooms, and for the first time, peace truly filled the house. Martha looked at Cal, her voice quiet. "Do you ever think Henry would mind us being here like this?" Cal met her eyes. "No, ma'am. I think he'd be proud. You've kept his family safe, and maybe he sent me your way for the same reason." Tears shimmered in her eyes. But this time they weren't from sorrow. The world outside might still judge them, whisper about the widow and the cowboy, but inside that house, there was warmth, laughter, and belonging. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. Months later, the Collins Ranch, once just Cal's old property, became known across Dusty Creek as Weston and Collins Ranch. People began to come by for work, for trade, for friendship. Even the harshest tongues grew quiet when they saw how strong that family stood together. Martha tended the home and kept it open to travelers. Ben and Luke worked the land proudly, and little Eli followed Cal everywhere, calling him Pa without hesitation. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Cal stood beside Martha on the porch, arm resting lightly around her shoulders. She looked out at her boys playing in the yard, laughter echoing in the golden light. "I never thought we'd have this again," she murmured. Cal smiled softly. "Sometimes the world shuts one door just to lead you to the right one." She leaned against him, heart full for the first time in a long while, and under the endless sky, with the sound of home all around them, Martha whispered, "We're home now." Cal squeezed her hand gently and replied, "All accepted."